Once again, thanks, Jay. And Madeleine, it's a pleasure having you here. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be great masterclass ahead for everyone. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. Most importantly, folks, this is your first time here. This is the first of many masterclasses. We've already done 5 masterclasses here at Cave. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's a pleasure, as always. If this is your first time joining here on Zoom, literally, we're going to be hosting a Q&A section, and you can fire your questions in the Q&A part right at the bottom of your screen. So no need to panic. It's nice and simple here at Cave. So make sure to fire those questions and keep them coming. But like I said, we're going to be doing this masterclass with Madeleine we've got like 2 hours of space. So we've got plenty of time. And she's going to be giving you guys an amazing presentation on creating concepts for creature design inside of ZBrush. So like I said, if you have questions, fire them as always. But like I said, today's guest is Madeleine. She has so much years of experience. She's done so many incredible things working with wetted digital all the way to double negative, you name it. She's basically done it. So it's a pleasure having her here. She's worked on films such as The Hobbit, even to Wonder Woman as well. And what I'm going to do is pass it over to Madeleine and let her take over the ropes. And I hope you guys enjoy today's masterclass. So thank you once again, Maddie, for coming on, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Jay.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks everybody for being here. So yeah, I make monsters and other things, but I like making monsters more than the other things. But I also make the other things. But like
Perfect.
most of us, I think I kind of grew up making monsters and looking at horror movies and makeup effects artists and creature films. And so ZBrush is great, and I'm sure you all agree, which is another reason why you're here. So we're just going to jump into ZBrush. I'm going to share my screen. Now, sometimes my camera share can tax my stream. I had a little bit of an issue yesterday with OBS and my just system resources being taxed. So at some point I might turn my camera off.
That's not a problem
but
at all.
keep my screen shared. So let me turn on screen share. Host attendee is disabled attendee screen sharing.
Just try it now, Maddie.
Okay. Who can share? All right, just let me make sure. Hang on, let me just adjust stuff here. Derp. Okay, and share screen. Okay, good. It's asking me which one. So desktop 1, share. Oops, let's get out of that. There we go. Oh, let's not close that. Let's just move that. There we go. So you should be seeing my ZBrush on your screen right now.
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right, wonderful.
Looking great. Awesome.
Figure out where to put the Zoom panel. I'll put it over on my other monitor. All right, so I've got a just a polystar on screen right now, just a ZBrush null object, which I will turn into a sphere. Since we have the time that we have, I'm going to start the way I usually start. So if I get an open brief, usually I'll start by sketching kind of a head and then build a body out from the head. So like, for example, on The Hobbit, when we're doing the Gundabad orcs, I started out doing lots of iterations on heads because we had a general idea what the body would look like. I do a lot of sketching in bed at night on Procreate. So I doodled up this little thing here, and I've got a spotlight loaded. Now, Spotlight is a texturing tool and a modeling tool inside of ZBrush, and it allows us to bring imagery in. So this is the bogey lady. So she's the long-leggedy beastie that goes clickety-clackety and creaks in the night. For some reason, she's got 2 knees and probably have 2 elbows. But we'll start and work up the head, just sketching that out in ZBrush and seeing where we go from there. And then at some point, I can always append a body on there. Usually I would do that with Z-spheres or maybe with a mesh insert. So I'm just going to scooch that over there, and I'll press Shift-Z to turn off that spotlight. So at any point, I just kind of want to remind myself of things that I liked, but I'm not going to like follow my thumbnail to, you know, a T. It's just kind of like that was like, oh, I think that was kind of neat. I might like to do that at the cave class. So, all right, that is really got a bit of a delay on there. So let me go ahead and look at unsharing my camera. I'm going to stop video and hopefully that keeps my. All right, so if I press the W key, it brings up the gizmo. And the gizmo has this little gear icon here where I can select polysphere. And I just leave the polysphere at its regular settings, and you press the W key again, and it drops you back into the normal gizmo. This just allows you to adjust the divisions, but these don't really matter because we're going to be dynameshing anyway. And so the first thing I do is turn on my X symmetry and then take my move brush and do big shapes. Always big shapes. Always thinking about big forms, and it's just sort of like the irony of it is that ZBrush is so well known for doing lots of details and lots of refined surfaces, but its strength is the fact that it allows you this brush-based sculpting, and it allows you to block in sculpturally those big forms. And that's like kind of like I've been teaching ZBrush now for about oh, my smooth isn't working because I need to go. If you have the spotlight open, you have to go to brush and you have to go to samples and turn off spotlight projection, and that lets you sculpt while you have a spotlight open. So ZBrush lets you sketch in sort of big shapes very gesturally, and that's really, really important, no matter what your medium is, to be thinking about large forms. I'm going to just add one subdivision level. I definitely got a weird delay on my brush. It's always the danger of streaming is you end up with these little weird things that happen to your brushes, like it keeps snapping back to where it was. There we go. I'll go to the clay tubes brush. I like using the clay tubes brush with no alpha, and I'll turn my focal shift down just because it makes it a soft brush, but I still use it in sort of big, aggressive, gestural ways. I try not to get too caught up in one little area, thinking too much about one thing. Oh, and what I wanted to say about subdivision levels is people often say, oh, how high should I subdivide the model? You shouldn't even worry about that. If you're not to a point that you're doing something like fine details, when you're pretty much at the end of your process, then it doesn't matter. You should always make any shape that you could make at the lowest possible subdivision level that can support the shape you're trying to make. That's it, and that will help so much as you're working in ZBrush to get a good form, because gesture, form, proportion are the important things. And if you've got a sculpture that has good form and no wrinkles and pores and details on it, it's still a good sculpture. Best sculptures in the world, the greatest sculptures in the world, don't have details. Things like Donatello's David or Michelangelo's David or Bernini, it's not covered in detail. It's just exceptional form. So I'm going to switch to the damn standard brush. I'm just going to do a quick little line right down here for that sort of bifurcated, creepy horizontal or vertical mouth running down the center of the head here. I'm going to go to my move brush again and step down my subdivisions. Again, I'm always making shapes at the lowest subdivision level that will support that shape. And that's funny because we're going to be going into Dynamesh, and I often say that I was talking to I was talking to somebody from Pixelogic several years ago about Dynamesh when it came out, and this person was also a trainer for ZBrush, and we agreed that Dynamesh makes it hard to teach ZBrush because people who have not experienced subdivision levels don't necessarily know why would you ever want to use them. And so in my ZBrush classes, I always sort of insist in the first project people do a sculpture without using Dynamesh, because this ability to move up and down subdivision levels is what allows you to finesse the shapes. And if you're working with like millions of polygons in Dynamesh, which we're going to be in, well, not millions, I don't Dynamesh up that dense, it's very, very difficult to sort of nuance your form. But Dynamesh is really good for establishing volumes, which is what I use it for. By the way, if there's any questions while we're going, feel free to chime in with them because you're not going to derail me. I'm pretty good at multitasking. So I can answer things as we go. So if something occurs to you, don't be afraid to ask it, because you have a question that probably 3 other people have, but everybody's just a little too shy to ask the question. So don't be shy. Don't worry about it. Ask away. So I'm using the clay tubes brush as a subtractive brush. I'm holding down the Alt key. And this is another thing. The smooth brush is destructive. Smoothing is like taking your thumb and running it across your drawing after you've done a whole bunch of like work trying to render light and shadow. It's bad. Don't do this. And it's something that I've done for a while, and it's just occurred to me in the training that I've done to kind of mention this, that a lot of times I'm not smoothing. What I'm doing is I'm knocking back planes. So I'll take that clay tubes brush, and I don't want to smooth this area. I'm like, okay, there's a plane here. I need to bring this out because there's a plane there, and I'm going to knock this back. And then if I turn my brush down and then do a tertiary plane, secondary and tertiary planes between those, it will start to refine that shape. Now I will do smoothing with a smaller brush, and sometimes I'll just say, okay, to heck with it, I'm going to turn my brush up and do a lot of smoothing because I'm at a high subdivision level and it's effective. But I'm overstating it a little bit to make the point that a lot of times people don't think about the fact that smoothing can actually be quite destructive to what you're trying to do and set you back a couple of steps when you don't need to. Let's see. I think I'm gonna take my move brush, and there's just a couple characteristic things in my thumbnail that I like. I like this curve right here, and I like this curve right here. So I just want to make sure that I get those in there. Again, it's masking as well is very, very, very important. Masking to isolate parts so you can work on them independently, and those big shapes. So like big curve there, that curve, and that curve. Those sweeps, I like those a lot. So I just want to make sure I don't lose them because they're characteristic for me of what I liked about my doodle. And I was like, oh, I like that relationship.
Awesome. Maddie, we've actually got our first question coming through.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question coming through is from Brenda. So thank you for your question. When modeling, do you think about other parts of the pipeline? Example, this character has 2 knees. Do you think about how it would move later or during the pipeline itself?
Yeah, I try not to do. So there's this sculptor named Mitch Devane who's amazing. He's the makeup effects sculptor. Worked for Rick Baker for years and years, and he had a really great analogy. He said that if he sculpts something as a concept that someone else can't accomplish as a prosthetic makeup, he's making a promise that someone else can't keep. So I do try and think about things like, you know, if the physiology that I'm putting together isn't going to work, like we ran into that a lot on Pacific Rim, and ran into it a bit on The Kid Who Would Be King, like how the wings functioned on Morgana, or how the body parts worked on a kaiju that we were putting in front of the director and the VFX soup. Yeah, definitely. I would think about whether or not it could work, but I try not to let it drive the design. Like if I'm trying to say, oh, that's going to be hard to rig, I was like, no. And I don't really like. It's sometimes that does come up where people be like, oh, it'll be a lot harder to do it this way. Can we do it this way?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, the production raising its concerns, and that's, you know, ultimately you're working for them. So, but I try not to make things that aren't going to work, because that's just rude.
Of course. Thank you so much for that. Keep them coming, folks. If you got any questions, like Mary said right at the start, as she's working away, I'll make sure not to talk over to her as she's explaining. But keep them coming, folks.
So I'm thinking about this big volume here, which is there. That's that volume. I'm just turning that around in my head, and thinking about actually realizing that this shape right here, which again, I'm not going to follow my thumbnail religiously, but that probably should come back a little bit. And then I'll take my clay tubes brush and just knock that plane, or bring that plane forward a little bit. Also, by the way, I always work under basic material 2. Basic material 2 is essentially just a blend shader, and I prefer this to everything up here. All of these matte cap materials are really pretty, and these are great when someone important walks by. You can switch to it and it makes everything look a little bit better. But when you're actually trying to work, don't use them, because the lighting is baked in, and a lot of them have a certain degree of translucency built into them. So if you've ever sculpted in Sculpey, you might have noticed that you really liked your sculpture and then you baked it and then it's like, it looks a little different. Well, that's because it lost its translucency. So the translucency will fool your eye. The basic material too is unforgiving because it has that specular element, it has a shadow and a midtone. And so it's very, very easy to see mistakes that would otherwise be hidden by like a gray shader. So I think I'm about ready to go to Dynamesh now. So I'll just go to Geometry, Dynamesh, and I'll Dynamesh at the default resolution because this is scale dependent. So sometimes it works well at that level and sometimes it doesn't. I always answer no to this question. And I'm just going to check my frame mode. And that's actually a little bit more dense than I like to Dynamesh. So I'm going to undo that because I can always increase my Dynamesh resolution if I want to. But I think it was at 128. So we'll do 64. And then Dynamesh answered no to that question. I don't freeze my subdivision levels. There we go. That's much, much better. That's loose and light and exactly what I want because I don't want to get trapped in thinking about details yet because details have their own logic and their own, it's very, very important. I don't want to downplay them, but it's definitely not something I want to get stuck in at the very, very beginning. I want to establish the big shapes first. So I'm masking everything but, oh God, my tablet, start behaving.
It's okay, take your time. It's always the joy of technology.
Yeah, I'm going to mask everything but where the neck is going to come from. Okay, and then I'm going to work up the occipital, the back of the skull that we can kind of see here. So let's take the move brush and we'll stretch all that down. And silhouette wise, I really like how it's sort of like this cowl almost of shoulders and skin. So I'm just going to stretch all this down and I'm going to use the move brush and just sort of, oh God, there's such a delay on my brush. It's crazy. Pull that out. And I'm going to clear my mask and then execute Dynamesh. And then I will do smoothing because it's all noisy and gross. So let's do some smoothing there. And I'll take my damn standard brush and I'm just going to carry my creepy mouth down here. She has no chin, so we're going to get rid of that chin. It's just this one long mouth coming about down here to the sternoclavicular notch, which is the notch above the sternum and between the clavicles. So in Latin, they call it sternoclavicular notch. Anatomical names are fun. You don't have to know them. I was very big on knowing them because I think having a name for a thing allows you a place in your mind to own it and remember it. So for me, it was important. But throughout like my education, which continues, I always say I'm a forever student.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like, I came to a conclusion at one point that there is a certain degree where you can overthink anatomy and worry too much about it, and you can become paralyzed by options and paralyzed by so much to learn. And so I've really started telling my own students to look at George Bridgman. You can't go wrong with George Bridgman.
Awesome.
And George Bridgman talks about how knowing the individual names isn't going to help you quite so much as knowing the overall volumes, knowing the larger groups. And he talks a lot about something he calls wedging, which is really nice. It's how one shape wedges into another, because a lot of times I see student work where, for example, the arms look like link sausages. Like there's like an equidistant kind of in the silhouette tuck in on either side of the limb, and that's a failure to recognize the wedging of one form into another. And Bridgman's really good about that. Also, you can find yourself doing this thing like when I first went to Weta, I did a concept of the I keep wanting to call them Urukai, but they're not, the Gundabad orc body. And
yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was really good. Well, not really good. I've never looked at anything I've done and thought, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But like the next day, usually I look at something and I'm like, oh, God, all I see is what I want to fix. But that's good too. So, I did that, and like one of the sculptors I really like kind of looked at it, was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And it kind of was like, what? That's not the reaction I was expecting. So instead of getting my feelings hurt, I was just like, so like, it doesn't seem like you really are into it. Why is that? And he's like, well, I mean, he's like, it looks like an anatomy study. It kind of looks like that orc goes to LA Fitness.
Mm-hmm.
Which ended up becoming like a little joke, an ongoing joke, that there's one orc that's really into like fitness, So he's just like, yeah, we're going off to Helm's Deep. We're going to kill some elves. So I did a traps day today. I really worked up my traps because, I know it's not like really, it's not practical, but I think when the moonlight glints off my muscles, it really terrifies the elves.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah.
Do you think that's always been a thing though when it comes to students? Is they always kind of get told for many years that anatomy is always the thing? Do you think that kind of takes away a lot of people's confidence?
I think it just can cause paralysis. People can be overwhelmed with the amount of stuff.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, that they need to know.
So we've actually got tons of questions firing through, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is from Darren. He's asking, if I had two subtools that I merged into one, I can't get rid of the seams. No amount of clay buildup and smoothing gets rid of it. Is there a way to remove the seam?
You get two subtools and you've merged them together.
Yep.
Sorry, could you?
So he's what he's asking. Yeah. So he's merged two into one, and he can't get rid of the seam.
Oh, okay. So when you merge them, I'm imagining that you merge two subtools with the merge menu. Yes. So you would just dynamesh those two subtools together. So if it's okay to change the topology, you can do this. So if I've got this subtool, and then I duplicate this subtool, and then move it down. So I have these two like this. Let me reduce my subtool count so we don't have that long list there. I'm going to turn these into spheres, actually. So I'm going to turn this into a sphere, and I'm going to turn this into a sphere. So if we've got two spheres and it's okay that the topology changes, then what I would do is I would merge them down, and then clear any masking, and then just dynamesh them together. So Darren, does that answer your question, or is it imperative to keep the topology consistent?
I'll double check the chat. Darren, if you want to respond in the chat, that'd be much appreciated. If that's okay. You can even put the thumbs up, the famous thumbs up here on Zoom. And like I said, folks, we've got many questions firing through. We've got 3 just came through just now, so keep them coming as Maddie continues to sculpt.
You can go ahead and relay those to me.
So the next one is it common to model a base mesh in Maya first and then bring it in for further detail such as anatomy, etc., inside of ZBrush?
Yeah, a lot of times things already have a base mesh. So, like for example, if you're doing a bipedal character, most of the time there's going to be like an archetype or a gen man, gen woman, gen child, gen dog, which is an existing base mesh that already has UVs, it already has everything set up on it, and it just saves the pipeline because you just use that. So a lot of times if you're working on a biped, you may very well bring in an existing base mesh that already exists. Excuse me. If you're working on something that's not, like if you're doing a dragon, it's kind of up to you. If you want to create a base mesh for that in Maya and then work on that in ZBrush, absolutely. But a lot of times what happens is the design changes through the modeling process. And so you're just going to have to redo the topology anyway. So that, for example, that happened on Kitty Would Be King. The wings and the fingers changed. There's the number of fingers changed a couple times. So that whole area would have to be reworked. So I just had to go back and redynamesh my mesh, change things, and any topology that had been set up was no longer applicable. So yeah, it's if that's how you want to work, which is rare. People often don't like to work that way.
Yeah,
nothing wrong with doing that. Yeah.
Perfect. Darren was also saying he has no need to preserve the topology for his sculpt. So he's going to give Dynamesh a go.
Awesome.
So I wish you all the best. Awesome.
Cool. So I'm just thinking about this plane right there where that light is. I just want to get that. And let's turn this off now so it's not so much about thinking about my thumbnail and more about having fun with what we've got here, since I've got a lot of the main stuff that I liked about the thumbnail I've got in here now. So bring this out and go to my clay tubes brush, and I just wanted to knock this shadow back. And I want to come over here. Well, I should hit the 9 key and save. I'm going to take the move brush, bring this back, and out. And let's add a little bit more torso to this. So I'll go to B for brush, I for insert, and I'll grab the IMM primitives brush, from which I will grab a polysphere, just a regular old polysphere. Just insert sphere is fine. Bring the two dots together and click and drag, and that inserts a sphere. And then I'll go to the move gizmo, and I'll just position that, and then take my move brush and, oops, I have my brushes hotkeyed, by the way. So I just press the number 1 for my move brush, because that's where I've got that hotkeyed. I'm just going to put rib cage in here.
Oh, this is an interesting question. I did not expect this one to come through. Kirsty's asking, what would you say is the next best alternative to ZBrush?
I don't really think there is an alternative right now.
Yeah,
I think,
same. I wouldn't.
yeah, I think that most software is sort of catching up to ZBrush. I think there's software that very much complements ZBrush. Wrap 3, I think it's called, is really good for wrapping base meshes onto a ZBrush sculpt. It's like a supercharged version of shrink wrap in Maya. I used to use retopology tools in 3D Coat years ago. On The Hobbit, I used some of those for a couple of things. But in terms of just like sculpting and painting, and just being kind of like the thing about ZBrush that makes it so amazing is just the personality behind it. Ofer doesn't necessarily, I mean, I would say Ofer developed ZBrush out of his own passion for it. So he comes up with things that you didn't even know you needed. Like,
Yeah.
I will admit, when Polypaint came out, I was like, this is dumb. Why do I want Polypaint? I need to be able to paint into UVs or whatever. And then once, I would never say that now. I would never be resistant to Polypaint now. I didn't realize I needed it. So yeah.
That's always the great thing, though. It's like it just keeps adding and adding. It's always the same thing with software, but you sometimes get so distracted with so much things going on. But I think that's the thing with ZBrush is, and like when I watch your streams, I know you keep it simple. Like you tend to only use like 5 brushes, because that's like the question so many people ask as well. Is like what tools to use all the time. But I'm pretty sure you'll agree. Do you only stick to like the 5 common things all the time?
In terms of brushes, yeah, I only pretty much use the brushes that I'm using right now. I use Move, Standard, Inflate, Clay Tubes, and Damn Standard, but I will, go away from those.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I try to do most of my things with that. And I also use Trim Dynamic, Trim Dynamic brush, which I'm going to use right now because there's a plane right here that I want to get, and I actually need to build it up a little bit. So I'm going to use the Clay Tubes brush to build up a little triangle here, which is the scapula. So I'm going to get those scapulas in there, those shoulder blades. And as I'm building them up, they're becoming little mountains. So then I'll take my Trim Dynamic brush. I'm not going to smooth it. I'm going to Trim Dynamic it. I'm going to plane it back, just like that. And there's a plane change at about this point, 2/3 of the way up the scapula, which, knowing the name of it is only so useful. It gives you a place in your brain to store it, but knowing it's there is the important part. It's like, speaks to what I was saying about kind of like knowing the shapes. Just worry about the big shapes, because this plane change is made by a variety of deep layer muscles. It's made by the very, very thin trapezius muscle that people tend to think is a lot thicker than it actually is. It's created by a bony landmark here called the spine of the scapula. But the important thing is to just know that plane change is there. You don't need to know the names of everything. And I've started telling my students lately as well that if you feel like you're overwhelmed with anatomy, learn the origin and insertion of the major muscles, the muscles that you can think about and see. Learn what their origin and insertion is. And if you go to my blog at maddiemonster.com, I have a feature there called Maddie Monster's Library, where I talk about some of my favorite anatomy books. And in there, I talk about a book by a man named Elliot Goldfinger. It's the Atlas of Anatomy for the Artist, and it's probably the best contemporary anatomy book published within like the last couple decades. And he, in that book, points out the muscle origin and insertion. So if you do things like this, so if you take your damn standard and you stroke the mesh from the origin of the sternocleidomastoid to its insertion, muscles, and you can tell the difference because a muscle pulls towards its insertion. So this muscle pulls this way. So that's its insertion. If you drag your brush kind of in that direction, you're well on your way there. Like if you do that well and you get those striations kind of flowing in the right way, it's going to work. it's going to look better than if you go in there and you sculpt a little shadow around every single muscle group, or if you don't try to make an effort with the anatomy at all. Of course, that's not going to work particularly well. But like right here, there's some rhomboids, so I'll be like, okay, these kind of go this way. And I'll hit that with a little bit of smooth. This is a situation where I would use some smooth. There's my spine of the scapula. So I'll take my standard brush. Spine of the scapula is there. That's kind of the right angle for it. So little things like that. And you see that in like, a lot of clay sculptors like Jordi Shell is really good with like very, very loose gestural application of water-based clay, where he's putting things down in their general flow and direction and not obsessing over like medical perfection and the creature anatomy, because that doesn't so much matter. It's the big shapes. So it sounds like there might be another question.
Yeah, we've got 6 that keep flying in. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick asks, what's the best thing about working in the creative industries as a character artist and creature artist in your well-established career?
Just the fact that it's the only thing I ever wanted to do, and I'm incredibly lucky that I get to do it. It was either this, be a parapsychologist. If I'm going on what I wanted to be when I was like 5 years old. But that's all I've ever done, is just make monsters in my parents' basement. And at one point, my dad said, Maddie, I'm sorry I didn't believe that you could make a living doing this.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, it's okay, Dad.
You proved them wrong.
Yeah.
Speaking of monsters, do you have a favorite monster that's been created that's like your favorite? Like, what's the one, like, out of every movie you've ever watched, that your go-to monster is?
I really like beautiful monsters. I like the kind of contrast between elegance and terror and monstrosity, what Barbara Kruger would call the monstrous feminine. I really like that. And one of my favorite examples of that, a lot of people would sort of class Alien in that, but Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead is an absolutely beautiful creature design to me, and I just love it so much. Because there's just this elegance and this beauty to the monster, and it makes Pumpkinhead terrifying, because Pumpkinhead, like Bogey Lady here, looks like she could just be like on one end of the room and then bam, one step and she's on you.
Yeah.
And I just think that's real spooky. I also quite like everything that Screaming Mad George has done.
I'm learning so many different names. It's great. Thanks for this.
Yeah, no problem. Screaming Mad George is a great, very surreal sensibility. He's a Japanese artist and brings a lot of influence from Japanese artists who, at the time that George was working in the States, were not very well known yet, like Yashiro Nirasawa, who thankfully gets a lot of recognition now. I need to fix this right here. He gets a lot of recognition now, Nirasawa. Unfortunately, he's passed away somewhat recently. But like, he had this really, really cool style that was just very, very surreal and very bizarre. And I really like his stuff. But Pumpkinhead is the answer to that question. Pumpkinhead.
I'll have to check it out. Everyone in the chat, make sure to check up Pumpkinhead. That's the one for you guys to check today. On you go.
No, I just want to say, I'm using the damn standard brush, holding down the shift key and letting go, and it just slices a straight line up like that. So that's a neat little undocumented trick, and it gives you an angle right there. So if I leave it at 0, it gives me a straight line going straight up the head there.
Perfect.
So go on.
So Nick, once again, thanks for asking, Nick. Much appreciated. He says, did you have any doubts about pursuing your dream? If so, how did you overcome the negativity?
I had doubts. I'm going to turn off my X symmetry because I want to open the mouth a little bit. I had doubts, I had doubts I always have doubts. I think it's sort of a thing for artists to admit that we have doubts. And I think a lot of times I try to talk to my students about doubts, because I think that there's an unrealistic expectation set that their instructors are always super confident and love everything they do and think that they're amazing all the time, and that's never the case. Every artist I've met who thought they were amazing also happened to be not very good and a jerk. So like, if you have doubts, that's fine. Everybody does. When I was in school, I had doubts about whether or not I wanted to do 3D, because I came from a sculpting background, and I'm quick saving with the number 9 key. And so at the time, everything was just moving verts in Maya. It was really unpleasant. It was not at all what I loved about sculpting, and I found that really hard to get my head around. So I was thinking about changing to illustration or painting, and just leaving the animation degree entirely.
Yeah.
But you know, I didn't. ZBrush came out, or ZBrush 2.5b came out, and made a huge difference for me. And so I stuck with that. And I would just get really flustered, you know, thinking that I was looking at my own progress and matching it against other people's and feeling like I wasn't doing enough. But the best answer to that is just imagine, no matter what, there's always somebody out there who has more natural aptitude for something than you do. They're starting out earlier than you, and the only thing that you can do is work harder.
Of
So just
course.
worked harder. And yeah, and so I just overcame the doubts, because, like, you know, what's the worst that can happen is, you know,
You just
just
keep
like,
trying. That's all you got to do.
exactly. So right here, I've made something asymmetrical that I want to be symmetrical for now. I want to open that mouth area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to geometry, modify topology, and there's an option to mirror and weld here. And this is a way to symmetrize a Dynamesh. And it works around the floor plane. If I turn the floor plane on, by default, it's the Y plane, but I'm going to turn on the X plane by pressing the very, very hard to see X button that's right there, turn off Y, and then I'll go to draw, and I will take my elevation slider and set that to 0, which puts it right in the center of the character, as you can see. And then if I press mirror and weld, it mirrors that side over and welds those verts together. So now that gives me the open mouth that I wanted. So it sounds like there was something else that you were about to relay to me question-wise.
Oh, yeah. So Kirsty was wondering, have you ever had Damien Standard pull the geo inwards at an odd angle, not towards the center of the model? Is there an option I have missed that prevents that?
Pulls at an awkward angle. Yeah, maybe. I think if you're, yeah, I think I've seen that before. It might just be this. I think it's operating on the surface normal that you click the first face you click on. You might go to the picker menu and make sure that you haven't adjusted anything in your orientation. These options here, and yeah, maybe check your source. But the easier than doing that is to go to brush, and at the bottom of the brush menu, there's an option to reset current brush or reset all brushes. If my brushes behave really strangely, I'll do that. And if that doesn't work, I'll restart ZBrush, unplug and replug my tablet in.
Perfect. Oh, she's saying thank you.
Thanks. No
Thanks
problem.
for the question, Kirsty. Much appreciated. I was actually I had a question of my own. I was wondering, do you still do stuff with makeup, or have you kind of completely moved over to the digital world completely?
I haven't done like anything with like silicone or prosthetics, like painting, anything like that since The Hobbit.
Right.
So
Okay.
but I still sculpt in clay just for my own pleasure. But nobody, like, there's not a lot of call for it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like makes me a bit sad. But yeah, I still do clay, and
So
I still know a lot of like really amazing sculptors and painters who don't work digitally.
yeah,
But it's just yeah.
it's always like the balance thing with traditional, because at the day you're always thinking about getting the job done for industry, etc. But would you ever maybe just throw in, maybe now and then, bringing into like your workflow the odd traditional method, or is it just literally a loose sketch, etc.?
What do you mean, like the traditional method, like things that I would have used in traditional media, or like make something traditionally and then?
So as in like actually using clay itself.
Um, I did a scan of a life-size wet clay sculpture I did ages ago, and I
Mm-hmm.
use that a lot when I teach poly painting. And I made a Z tool of that. A lot of times I go the opposite way. I work with a foundry, and I like to take things and have them made into metals. It's when I moved to
Oh,
London,
nice.
I
Yep.
was in the Museum of London, and I love the city. It's like I love London. I love living here. It's home.
Yeah, we
It's the
completely agree. It's a great place.
it's yeah, it's wonderful. And I went to the Museum of London with a friend, and saw this ring, this Roman ring that was found in on the riverbank. And I was looking at it and thinking, everything I do, like, most of it gets forgotten after a couple months, because
Mm-hmm.
like the next movie comes out. But this ring was made over 2,000 years ago, and it's still here, and nobody knows who made it, but it's here. And then
Yep.
I just fell in love with the idea of making things in metal. So I'll take a lot of my my Z tools, and I'll try and have them worked up by a foundry. I'll 3D print them and then have them cast in metal. So I go the opposite direction now. So yeah, I also live in a little London flat, so it's hard to to work in clay or paint and not lose
Yeah.
your deposit.
You need the space. Because I remember I was watching your stream a few years ago, and you were actually mentioning about when you moved over to Weta, you were talking about, was it a rugby sculpture you had to do? It
Yeah,
was,
the Rugby World Cup sculpture. Yeah.
yeah. Was that actual, like an actual statue?
Yeah, it's an actual statue. It's
Yeah.
on the waterfront in Wellington, New Zealand, and it's I did the central figure, the rugby figure that's jumping
Wow.
up in the
That's
air
amazing. Incredible.
in the maquette. But the final sculpture was done in clay over a 3D mill. So I don't claim the sculpture that's sitting out there. That was many people's work.
Yeah.
But
A collective.
yeah, I worked on the maquette, the proof of concept to put it there.
Perfect. We've got another question coming in, and it's from Mate. So he says, how much attention should we give to the material properties of the creature's skin during the sculpting phase, if it gets textured anyway?
Material properties, I don't worry about them during the sculpting phase because that's an extra thing to be concerned with, and I think it'll do you a disservice if you obsess over that. I would just worry about having a nice gray, neutral, maybe green, just a neutral color with sort of the material properties like you see here with a little bit of specular and a mid-tone and core shadow. So otherwise, you're going to put yourself at a disservice. You're going to do a disservice to yourself, put yourself at a disadvantage because you're going to be worrying about the material or be distracted by materials. Like I know a guy that poly paints his stuff as he's sculpting it. And I think it looks really cool. But personally, I tried it and I didn't like it for myself because I found it distracting. Because I was like, then I became a little bit more married to certain ideas than I should have because I had poly painted around them, or I just something about it didn't quite work for me. And I think that may just be the fact that I'm accustomed to I come from working in clay. And so it was always green. And, I might go in there and put looks like I lost my Dynamesh. Go to geometry, Dynamesh. Yep, Dynamesh got turned off for some reason. In clay, you might put a little magic marker dot on the ping pong ball eye, just so you've got something you can identify with. But I don't worry about materials or things like that when I'm sculpting. I will think about, I'll be thinking ahead as to how something might be painted, but I'm just concerned with the shapes when I'm sculpting it.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from Thomas. He says, hi, what would some of the key skills and knowledge you should have as a modeler when starting out within the VFX industry? He's also recommended, he's saying, anatomy, hard surface, well-rounded understanding of topology, etc. Is there anything else you would add to the list?
So anatomy, hard surface, and what else?
Topology.
Yeah, topology. I'm going to go to subtool master here, and that's scale master, subtool master, and I'm going to mirror these eyes across the x-axis into one subtool. Well, it sort of kind of depends on, like, if you want to specialize in organic modeling. I would I always tell people like probably the best thing you could possibly put on your reel if you want to be like an organic modeler would be like an equestrian statue. Like there's a great equestrian statue of Augustus Caesar at the British Museum, and it's just a dude in armor on a horse. But if you can sculpt a dude in armor on a horse, you can do monsters. You can sculpt people. You can sculpt costumes. It's just I think that's just a really good portfolio piece. And there's like for modeling, like, and I've reviewed modeling reels. I'm not all that impressed with monsters on a modeling reel because I really want to see what somebody can do in terms of like a likeness, or what somebody can do in terms of like like humans and animals, because that's a lot more descriptive for typically what you're doing as a modeler. If you're putting yourself forward specifically for like concept, that's a whole other bag of cats. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the analogy I'm looking for here, but
No, I know what you mean.
But even then, it's like I'm going to actually increase my Dynamesh resolution just a teensy weensy bit. That was not a teensy weensy bit. That slider is like off the hook.
So
do that.
basically what you're saying is that when it comes to like, I guess, just like your general portfolio for a creature concept artist, it's mainly showing that you can do like animal sculpts, also showing you can do the anatomy well, and then
That
being
was the
smart.
question was about organic modeling, so that's for modeling reel. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
perfect. So well, actually, let's spin it around. So if it was for a creature concept, then what would you be looking for in particular?
Well, typically I don't review art department reels.
Hmm.
But I've seen concept on reels that I have reviewed. I'm not high enough up in art department to review reels. But
Wait, you're a master though. It's okay.
yeah.
We all appreciate it.
No, thanks. I think a range of styles and experience and ideas. Um, Tell you one thing I wouldn't do. I wouldn't copy other people's stuff. Like, and a lot of people hate it. Like, oh, I know that like Carlos Fuente and Miles Tevis, a lot of people will do copies of their work, like master copies of their work, and put it on portfolios, and they really don't like that. So if you do
Yeah.
anything that's a master copy and the master is alive, ask them, because some people don't like that. But like for creature stuff, I think it's good to have variety. I think it's good to have actual animals in there. It's good to have sketches. It's good to show your process, show how you ideate, show you like Photoshop paint over or rendering,
Nice. Yeah.
like rendering, not like rendering like Arnold rendering, but like rendering your piece so it's in an environment and it has personality too. Nothing should be in a T pose. Things should be posed. You should be experiencing the character. Um, Literally, you should be experiencing the character of your piece. It shouldn't just be this is my model, look at its anatomy as it stands in a T pose.
Yeah.
There should be attitude and there should be presence, because that's kind of what your job is, to give the art director, whoever is paging through all the work that day in dailies to see what they like. You're trying to give them that moment when they get to your image where they're experiencing the character for the first time in a story, and it could be on the page or not. It could be from the script or it could be not. It could just be the idea. I got this from Jamie Bezwarak, who, if you've never heard of him, you should look up his work. He's an absolute genius. He sculpted Gollum. He's incredible, incredible traditional sculptor. And he said to me that he always considered the maquette to be like the moment of introduction to the character, like the first time you see the character and he wants to like create a story about the character with their pose and their facial expression and whatnot. So yeah.
Well, when you mentioned Jamie, I was going to say as well, like when he designed, like he got the original for Smog, and that when they were breaking that down, that just blew my mind. It was incredible.
Mm.
Once again, another question. Thanks again, Darren. He's saying, what importance do you place on rendering?
Rendering as in like
And
3D rendering, or rendering as in like painting on top of your work?
so he's also saying ZBrush doesn't have an amazing renderer.
Yeah,
Other
okay.
software does it better. I assume, is there any ones that you'd recommend for
Yes,
choice there?
yes. Okay, so in terms of like rendering the piece out of ZBrush to get it into Photoshop, I will render it in ZBrush. I've got a few things that ZBrush can actually do a really good render. It's just not real clear where to go do it. There's under the lighting menu, there is a light cap. Light cap is using HDR, and that you can get real good. You can get really nice renders out of ZBrush. It's just hard. It's hard to know where to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
The easy thing to do is buy Keyshot. Keyshot's amazing. I think Keyshot's just great, and it's worth every penny to subscribe for it. And it will give you it's the perfect artist renderer because you don't have to go in and futz around with numerical settings. It's very turnkey. You load it in. You're in an environment. You can change your lighting environment. You can then go into that lighting environment and you can change the lights in it. So you can add key lights, you can add rim light, you can change their color and move them around. It's really easy to use and really, really effective. And it does simple animations like turntables and zooms and things like that. It's great, and it renders quickly and it renders while you're working in it. So as you're sitting there, it's rendering in the viewport so you can see the effects of what you're doing. You want to do skin, you grab a translucent shader, drop a translucent shader on there, and it works. So it's really, really good. And it dials directly into ZBrush. If you go to render, there is an external render option here. So it'll link right to Keyshot. So if I were to turn that on, this might completely clobber my system resources. But if I did this, and then let's hope for the best, render,
Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens.
it's,
Let the magic happen.
yeah, it'll open up Keyshot.
Because he was also wondering, also for that question as well, do you ever think Pixelogic will do anything to improve their rendering for the future?
Well, I think that they're real happy with this Keyshot bridge.
Yeah.
So, oh God, this is really pounding the resources here. All right, so like get our guy in here like this, and you know it's already in this nice environment. I can go to my materials, and I've got materials here that I have actually, something's gotten a little funky here. There we go. I can go to my personal materials here, and I can grab like, where's, no, that's the organ. Like this is alien skin. There you go. So that's just an alien skin preset that I put together that I really like. I mean, that's just gets you so far. And if you've got poly paint in ZBrush, it comes through as poly paint. If you have hair in ZBrush, it comes through as hair. So, I mean, this is actually really nice too, because I'll often come in here and just look at my work under a different camera and different lighting to get an idea of how it's going. You know, I can move this lighting environment around very, very easily, or I can change it to something else. If I go to environment, it's really eating up so much system resource to, I'm going to have to get out of Keyshot here in a second. So if I go to like outdoor, we can put our character out in a park. So if I drop that environment in there, bam, now we've got an entirely different lighting setup. And I'll just move where that key, where the hot spot is. And then I can go into my environment settings and go to the HDR editor. And then I can, if I want to, I can add extra lights in here. So maybe I want to put a light here, and maybe I want to change the color of that light. So I can exercise a whole lot of control, but it's real artist friendly. So, yeah.
Thanks for showing that. Much appreciated.
No problem.
Great question. So keep them coming, folks.
Let me quit out of Keyshot. Don't save. It's nice to see that in there, though.
I'm loving the skin. The skin's great.
Thanks. Okay, go away, Keyshot.
That's always a question I see a lot as well. Like everyone always asks, like, how do you create the best skin? That's one I hear so many times.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take the clavicles. So the clavicles have kind of a funky design about them here, where I'm going to mask these out. Now, clavicles sweep back. A lot of times people mistake them for straight lines. They're not. They can look like straight lines when you're looking right at them, but they sweep back like handlebars. They look exactly like handlebars. I'll never forget my anatomy professor getting coming into class and getting on the back of the skeleton and grabbing the clavicles and trying to pedal the skeleton around the room when we were talking about the shoulder girdle. And it just stuck with me because that was hilarious. But I want to bring those clavicles down. So I'm going to kind of tweak them away from the human. I'm going to go to the gizmo and alt click over here to put my pivot there. And I'm just going to rotate them down like that, snap to a side view, rotate them forward a little bit. And there we go. And then I'll just execute Dynamesh. It sounds so harsh. Execute Dynamesh. I feel like...
Well, when you go.
Go on.
I was just going to ask, when it comes to anatomy, is there anything that you've always noticed a lot of artists tend to do wrong? Is there any like main features that's kind of stood out to you that people have not quite mastered yet, or like particularly students?
There's common mistakes that I see in my classes.
Yeah.
That you know, we all have mistakes that we need to look at and be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And learn from. But I think real common ones are things like on faces, people, like a really big one I always point out, like, because when it's there, it's awesome and it's really exciting to see. But when it's not, you're just like, oh, they missed out on that one part. That's the nodes of the lips. So like if you look at the corner of your mouth, and this is called the node of the lip. Now I can't do it on her because she doesn't have her shoulders are too wide. She doesn't have the same kind of mouth. But if you look at the corners of your mouth, there's this little donut shape.
Mm-hmm.
where your upper lip and lower lip meet, and that's a tension point where like the zygomaticus major, zygomaticus minor, the buccinator, the depressor anguli oris, and a couple other muscles are all grabbing the same general area, so it creates this little pucker there. Like that's a really important kind of landmark, and it's just something I notice when it's not there, but when it is there, like I recommended somebody like at Gentle Giant when I was the art director there. I recommended somebody to be hired just because they sculpted a middle-aged, overweight soldier on
Mm-hmm.
their demo reel, which I thought was hilarious because at the time everybody was doing like these ridiculously super fit space marines, and his reel had this like fat old soldier like stepping into a bucket. It was
Okay,
like
awesome, nice.
Colonel Clink from like Hogan's Heroes or something. It was
Yeah.
hilarious, and also because the face, he had gotten the nodes of the lips in there. I was like, that's fantastic. So I want to narrow the shoulders really quickly. So I'm going to mask this, invert the mask, and then just control click on the masked area a couple times to feather the edges of it. And that all got too broad, so I just want to bring these in considerably. So was there another question? It sounded like there was another
Yeah,
question.
another one coming from Nick. He was wondering, what's the best way of creating an original design? What is your method of approaching realism in creatures? So two kind of questions. So we'll start with the first one. So what's the best way of creating an original design?
Um,
That's a big question.
yeah, I'm just trying. I mean, listening to what the director says and being able to read between the lines of what the director says. Because sometimes people say something, but they don't say exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And through experience, sometimes you can kind of read between the lines of folks. You get a feel for people. Like sometimes, like some directors, you could tell if they're really influenced by video games. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was very surprised when I started like meeting directors who were the directors no longer seemed to be so influenced by cinema. Well, not all of them, but when I started meeting directors who were referencing video games rather than cinema. And I was like, oh God, I've got to start playing video games now or I'm going to be irrelevant.
Yeah.
And so I think listening to what they are looking for, like a lot of times people will just say, there's a joke that when the monster pops up in the script, it always says, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of times that's not true. They do want something they've seen before. So you have to, and this is oftentimes kind of down to, as an artist, you're not necessarily going to have this strength, this ability to do this, depending on how much access you have to the director or what. But sometimes you can kind of push things towards being bold. Sometimes people, so it's a case by case basis. You don't want to go in there and start telling a director their business if it's not appropriate. But if you can like be like, well, I mean, I think this would work really well because this is sort of unexpected because of this, and that's sort of like kind of when you're putting your work down, like saying like, I think this is my thought process here. This is why I did this particular thing, and this is why I'm thinking this particular thing. So you're sort of like kind of creating an opportunity for things to be different, because it's scary to do something different. It's scary to
Yeah.
break away from the norm. And in terms like I guess a more practical answer for you is to just like look in different places for inspiration, look in the natural world. I look at a lot of like I often tell people like I love my art station. I love looking at other people's work on ArtStation. I think it's awesome, but I try not to make that the only art I look at. I love the symbolist art movement, which is easiest to describe, well, it's not the most accurate description, as a proto-surrealist movement. It's a 19th century art movement that's based around sort of dreams and mythology. And I really like artists like Carlos Schwab. I like contemporary artists like Clive Barker and Odd Nerdrum. And whilst they don't necessarily directly relate to creature design, Clive Barker can, but they they'll get you thinking in different ways and get you looking at different things. And if everyone's sort of looking at the same things, everybody's coming out of the same sort of visual vocabulary and the shape vocabulary. And that's another thing too, like our monster vocabulary is quite shared. We've all seen the same movies. We've all seen the same characters.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave the shoulders here for a minute because I'm getting into an area that I want to actually rethink. So I'm just going to move that out. So that was very long-winded. I hope that answered
No,
your question.
that's perfect. He was also wondering he also put it later down on the questions. He was saying, once again, when it comes to reference, is there any particular kind of way you kind of set up your reference? I guess you get lots of reference of like different animals, etc., anatomy. Is there a particular way you order things?
No, I just have two screens. There's like fancy programs for organizing your reference that people use, but I just have a second monitor and I'm on a Mac and I have Preview. I have a folder with my reference and I open them all in Preview so I can page through them. Or
Yeah,
Preview lets you share them out or save them out as a PDF. So I might make a PDF of my reference and then page through them, or make a mood board of it and
yeah.
zoom into it.
Because like for me, it's always been well, I only came across it this year was PureRef.
Hmm.
And for years, I was always wondering how could I get everything organized, like you said, because I always like to have everything in front of me. Because one of the things I was always taught to was try not to rotate your head too much in terms of like observing your reference. But then again, I guess it always depends like what you're trying to get out of it.
Oh, oh yeah, that's a good point. PureRef, that's the one of those programs I was thinking of, is
Oh, you would
PureRef.
love it. It is great.
Yeah.
It's you can overlay it on top of like your ArtStation, etc. And it's really nice a really nice feature.
Overlay it over your ArtStation.
Over your ZBrush, sorry.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, and ZBrush also has this see-through option here, which lets you see through the interface if you want to keep reference behind it. But I just I just have it on my other screen and look at it, or I bring it into Spotlight like I have here. So yeah. So let me
Perfect.
see. Let me come back to my shoulders here. And do, 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 do. Oh, that brush delay. So here's a good example. I'll take my damn standard brush and I'll turn my Z intensity down a little bit. And I'm just going to stroke along what would be the clavicular head of the pectoralis muscle, but I've got it going in a different direction here because I'm thinking I'm going to put the arm in here in kind of a funky way, but I need to actually move this whole structure. So I'm going to mask this out. I want to swing the arms forward kind of like a bear that's standing on its hind legs, or a little less human. So let's see if I can get away with this. I'm just going to rotate from here. Yep, that looks cool, cool, cool. And I'll rotate from here and bring them down. Ah! And bring that down. And whilst I have that mask, I'm just going to make sure that the deltoid there isn't growing into the body. And I'm going to make sure that the back wall of the armpit here is visible. That's another thing too. That's a common mistake, is that people make the arm connection to the body too thick. Like if you were to take your arm and stick it out from your body right now, and then put your thumb up in your armpit, and then take your middle finger and put it on top of your shoulder, you
Yeah.
realize that the connection of your arm to your trunk is not that big. When I was in Cadaver Lab, I took an arm off of a body, which was quite an experience, and it was very interesting to recognize, because I knew intellectually that the only bony attachment, the only skeletal attachment of your arm to your torso
Hmm.
is right there. That's the only joint. That's the only joint where your arm actually attaches to your torso. Everything else is shoulder girdle. It's free floating. So up in here, you've got the back wall of your armpit. And a lot of times people miss that out. So the arm looks like it's just this big trunk attached to the body, but it's not. It goes up. There's a lot of depth up in there that you need to get. So I'm going to do B for brush, I for insert, go to my insert primitives. And I'm getting a little sidetracked thinking about the arms here. So I
It's
want
all
to
right.
get away from the arms pretty quick.
I was
But
going to ask you, what was it like actually attending this lab? Because I know you did, was it like 50 odd hours or so
yeah.
literally studying? What was that experience like? Because,
I've got a blog post up at Maddie Monster about it. It was very, very amazing. It was moving. It
hmm,
was life changing as an artist, and on a personal level, it was very, it was an emotional experience. I was doing it alone, so I
okay.
didn't have the benefit of processing it through my peers. Like, if you're a medical student, you're in gross anatomy with peers, but I was in it alone. I was in the
Hmm.
lab alone for all 50 hours, doing self-guided with Grant's dissector, and
Well,
it was really intense, and it was amazing, and it it absolutely changed my understanding and perceptions of a lot of things, and it was the perfect way to sort of continue um, my artistic education. I'm very, very thankful that I was given that opportunity.
yeah. Is that something you would recommend everyone to at least, well, depending on, like, would you recommend everyone who's tuning in to check that out? Or to actually
uh,
give it a go itself, like actually try it?
yeah. I think I often say that in in like most like kind of Western countries, the taboo around cadaver lab is comes from the outside rather than people there. They get quite keen on the thought of an artist coming and observing or being part of it. So ask. Like one thing that we don't do as artists is sort of like ask for what we want. So you just kind of get in the habit of just asking for things, because you'd be amazed at how many people don't ask for things. And the worst thing that someone's going to think is that you're presumptuous,
Yeah.
which can be, I can sometimes feel, I don't want to be rude. I don't like the idea of coming off as rude. I should have been born here. um, like I don't want to, but I'm also not afraid to just sort of ask for things. And I think
Yeah.
if you just reach out and ask your local medical school, can I audit an anatomy class, or I'm an artist, may I come observe this? You'd be surprised at how jazzed they are at the thought of an artist coming and observing their anatomy course, because so much of what we know about anatomy, it was artists first in the Renaissance, like stealing away to examine corpses. It was not it was not looked upon well at the time.
Yeah.
So artists did it because no one's ever liked artists. We're the least important career, haven't you heard?
No, boo. Completely disagree.
Yeah.
I think that's always the crazy thing, and I completely agree, and I'm really glad you brought it up. Is the fact that at the end of the day, it's always about communication and getting involved. Like, at the end of the day, you don't know what could happen. You might get something that could completely change your career. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, by attending this and by actually dissecting it, etc. Like I saw all the photos on the blog. Like you saw the face. Like I got such a shock when I saw it, and I learned so much just by looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
You learn so many different things by trying these things out, and at the end of the day, it's the only
Mm-hmm.
way. So if you guys are tuning in, like go to all these places, read all these books, see what happens. You never know. There might be a place in the place that you live that might have a place that could change your career. You never know. Oh, more questions. So next question is a wee bit of a different one. Have you had any trouble with grooming hair in your work?
Um, I usually paint hair. I will do like for the longest time I didn't use fiber mesh that much, but now I will use it. But for like proper groom, that's all done by a groom artist who is like a professional groom artist. That's what they do,
Mm-hmm.
and they're much better at that sort of thing than I. There's the artistry of it and the technical aspects of it, and I find it fascinating, but it's not something that I have done, and I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have any experience doing that. But when it comes to putting hair on a character, I would use maybe fiber mesh, or most of the time I've got a whole stack. Well, not a whole stack. I've got 9, because I try and limit my brushes. I'm really big on limiting options, limiting palettes, limiting the opportunities to be overwhelmed. So I've got like I think 8 hair brushes and fur brushes in my Photoshop that I've collected over the years that I use. So I'll paint fur and hair.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then later on down the line, it's applied as an actual groom.
Yeah. Like, so I think that's the thing, like, especially when I was studying university, you kind of get sidetracked with all these different tools, but you realize that in a day, especially in ZBrush, like when everyone's starting out in ZBrush, they get very daunted by the fact that the UI is like there's so much going on. But at the end of the day, you only need like, I know it's a bit of an understatement, but you only need like 5 brushes, etc. You don't really need a lot to get the job done. And I think it's just realizing that you can actually make anything if you just take your time and focus on just practicing the craft.
Yeah, I don't think that that's an understatement at all. I think 5 brushes is plenty.
Yeah.
Here's a good example right here. There's a couple happy accidents here, but right there, I'm just sort of gesturally stroking, um, because I know that the origin of the deltoid, this is the scapular head of the deltoid, is here. All right, and I know that it flows in this direction, that way. I do not want to do this. This is a big mistake that everybody always does. I'm going to describe this whole shape with one big shadow. Don't do that. Sketch gesturally in the direction of the flow of the muscle, and you can come through here and get some of the striations in it. Maybe knock them back just gently with a smooth brush, reintroduce them. That's what we want. Also, a really, really good book is Edward Lanteri's Modeling and Sculpting the Human Figure. So let's say, for example, I want this to stand out more. We have to think about sculpture the same way that we think about drawing and painting. In Florence, they taught sculpture the same way they taught painting, and that's the tradition that Lanteri came from. It was a very 19th century style of learning because that's where he came up in 19th century, early 20th century. He talks about the color of the shadow, which is a very strange choice of words. He means the value, relative lightness and darkness. So if this were a painting in Photoshop, we'd be looking at our values. That's why painting over our ZBrush models is so easy. You get your Gersal right there. You get your perfect gray shaded values right off the bat, and then you start glazing on top. So right here, if I want to change this to look deeper, a lot of times people think, all right, well, I'll take my brush and I'll deepen it. That's not always the solution. Sometimes, and this requires you to think like a painter, we are not so much concerned with cutting a big deep hole there. We're just concerned with the value of that shadow. It's too light. We need a darker value there in this particular light setup. That's another thing too. Always be sure to be moving your light, which I'm not doing because I'm talking and doing everything else. But my point is here, I'm not going to cut that in deeper. I'm going to raise what's next to it. So a lot of times you don't think about that. Raising what's next to something is going to darken the value of that shadow. And it has the exact same effect as carving that shape in, but it may be more accurate to that form. So just be aware of that. I don't know that that's accurate here, but I kind of like what just happened. So I'm going to keep that. And I'm going to traverse across this, just lost my brush. I'm going to traverse across this furrow with a couple lost edges. I'm going to just run that brush across there. And that's going to break up that transition there. Just hit that with a little bit of smooth and that transition there.
Maddie, Kirsty was just wondering if you could repeat the name of the book again, please. Just
yes, it's Modeling and Sculpting the Human Figure by Edward, Edouard, Lanteri, Lanteri.
Thank you very much.
Be sure to go subscribe to my blog because every month I put up Maddie Monster's library, right? I post up books like that and talk about what it is about those books that I particularly like. Lanteri is coming up, but I've got another one that's going up before him. That's another sculpting manual that I think is really good. And design manuals are really good. There's the couple that I'll be talking about, which are literally just college level graphic design books, which are really good for creatures because, like I said, it's all down to basic shapes and design language. And a lot of times we don't think about the design language. You don't think about the basic shapes. We don't think about things like repetition and rhythm and the way abstract graphic forms interrelate to one another. And that's what all creature design is. I worked with a designer named Larry Greer at What a Workshop. He's amazing. He does he's a graphic designer by training. He does all the branding and stuff for D'Antwoord, the band D'Antwoord. He's was a graffiti artist and stuff, I think. But he did a bunch of stuff on Elysium and a lot of those robot movies, Chappie, things like that. And he says that he treats everything like a logo. He said, if I do a gun, if I'm doing a character, I'm doing a vehicle, I start out thinking of it like a logo. And that makes so much sense because the exact same thing, your exact same concerns with the logo are iconic shape and memorability. And that's the exact same thing you want with a creature. You want an iconic shape and you want something that's memorable. And if you don't have an iconic shape, and you've got this wonderful tool here in ZBrush now that helps you determine whether or not your silhouette is working, it's not going to work. So you just think of things in those abstract terms. People tend not to do that or talk about that, but it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thanks for diving into that. And then another thing that you said there about the silhouette tool, I'm so happy with when that got added because I always used to use just the matte cap material that did it to switch them over. Mm-hmm. And then that completely changed the game for everything.
Oh yeah, I used to do the same.
And then... on you go.
No, go on.
I was just going to say everyone in the chat saying thanks for going over, so much appreciated.